Have you ever wondered what secrets a quiet little town might be hiding beneath the snow? In Ashwood Creek, a police officer stumbled upon something that would change everything: an abandoned cabin, a scarred German shepherd, and a truth tied to the darkest corners of loyalty and betrayal. What followed was not just a fight for justice, but a fight for redemption. And before I take you into this journey of courage, let me ask, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to know. Wishing you a wonderful day as we begin this incredible story together. The winter air in Ashwood Creek carried the kind of silence that could settle deep into a man's bones. Snow blanketed the rooftops and the narrow streets, muffling the crunch of footsteps and swallowing every distant sound. The mountains encircled the town like watchful sentinels, their peaks veiled by clouds that glowed faintly in the pale morning light. It was a place that outsiders might have called picturesque, but those who lived here knew how silence often hid things too heavy to be spoken aloud. Daniel Whitaker eased his SUV down Main Street, the snow-packed tires humming against the frozen asphalt. At 40 years old, Daniel looked like a man carved from the same granite as the mountains around him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his frame still carrying the discipline of his years in the Army, before he had traded fatigues for the dark navy of the Ashwood Creek Police Department. His short brown hair had begun to gray at the temples, streaks of silver that hinted at battles both fought and endured. His hazel eyes, steady but shadowed, had not held the same brightness since the ambush 3 winters ago that had claimed the life of his partner, Ryan Miller. That night had left him quieter, not broken, but altered, carrying grief like an extra weight beneath his uniform. Daniel was not a man who wasted words. To his neighbors, he was polite but distant, a figure they respected but did not always understand. The loss of his wife years before, followed by Ryan's death, had carved hollows in him that no amount of small talk could fill. He kept his promises, did his duty, but when he returned home at night, he wrote letters to his wife in a journal that no one else would ever read, pouring out the words he couldn't speak aloud. The SUV turned off the main road, tires crunching on a narrow trail dusted in fresh snow. The patrol had been uneventful so far, but Daniel had learned that silence was deceptive. His radio crackled faintly, then stilled. The forest closed around him, branches heavy with frost, the air so sharp it stung his lungs when he stepped out into it. His boots pressed deep into the powder as he scanned the clearing ahead. There, half hidden among skeletal aspens, stood a cabin. The structure leaned as though weary of its own existence, roof sagging beneath years of storms, windows clouded by grime. The porch boards sagged when Daniel stepped onto them, groaning like old bones. He pushed open the unlocked door, the hinges shrieking. The smell hit him first: mildew, rust, and something alive, but fading. Inside, the cabin was dim, shafts of gray light filtering through cracked boards. Dust hung in the air, stirred by his footsteps. At first, the silence pressed against him, but then he heard it: the scrape of chain against wood, a shallow, rattling breath. His hand drifted to the grip of his sidearm as he followed the sound to the corner. There, in the deepest shadow, lay a dog. It was a German shepherd, large even in its hunched position, its once proud black and silver coat dulled and matted, patches missing to reveal raw skin beneath. The dog's legs were bound tightly with rough rope, its muzzle strapped with cracked leather. Each breath came ragged, its ribs rising sharply against the skin, but its amber eyes burned with something fierce, something alive. Daniel froze, breath caught in his throat. Recognition struck him with the force of a blow. Those eyes, he knew them. 3 years ago, on the same night Ryan had been killed, his K-9 partner had vanished without a trace. He had told himself the dog was gone, that it was kinder to believe that than to imagine what horrors might have befallen him. But now, staring at those scarred amber eyes, he knew the truth. "Shadow?" he whispered before catching himself, voice cracking in the cold air. His knees hit the floorboards as he dropped beside the animal, his gloved hands fumbling with the ropes. "Easy, boy, it's me." The German shepherd trembled, not from fear, but recognition. His ears twitched, his body straining weakly against the bindings. Daniel pulled out his knife and cut the ropes one by one. When he slid the muzzle free, the dog coughed, sides heaving. Up close, The scars told stories, old wounds of service, new ones that spoke of deliberate cruelty. Someone had kept him alive, but only barely, and only for their own purposes. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked up and froze again. On the far wall, half hidden beneath peeling wallpaper, was a symbol. Painted in deep red, crude but unmistakable, it depicted a raven with outstretched wings. Daniel's stomach knotted. He had seen it before. The Black Ravens, a gang Ryan had been investigating before the ambush. He had never been able to prove their involvement in Ryan's death. But here, in this cabin, their mark glared back at him like a challenge. The German shepherd's head lifted weakly, his gaze fixed not on Daniel, but on a bolted door at the back of the cabin. Rust clung to the hinges, but Daniel felt a draft seeping through the cracks. Whatever lay behind it, the dog wanted him to see. He reached out, running a hand along the door, but before he could pry it, the crunch of snow outside made him tense. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. She was a woman in her late 20s, medium height with dark brown hair pulled into a practical bun beneath her knit cap. Her face was pale from the cold, but her brown eyes were sharp, observant, carrying both discipline and warmth. She wore a heavy parka over dark jeans and sturdy boots, a badge clipped to her belt. "Ethan Whitaker," she said, her voice clear but cautious. "I'm Officer Kate Ramirez, transfer from Phoenix, 2 weeks in. I was following up on a lead about missing retired K9S. Looks like I found the right place." Daniel straightened, shielding the dog instinctively. "This isn't just a retired K9, he said, his voice low. "This is mine. He's been missing for 3 years. Kate's gaze fell on the raven symbol, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I've seen that mark before. Black Ravens. They've been running dogs through an illegal network, selling them, training them for fighting. Worse." She crouched slightly, her eyes softening when they met the shepherd's. "This one, he survived more than most would." The German shepherd gave a faint whine, pressing closer to Daniel. Kate stood, her face hardening again. "If the Ravens left him here, it wasn't by accident. They wanted you to find him, which means they're watching." Daniel's jaw set. He looked down at the scarred shepherd, then back at Kate. "Then we'll give them a reason to regret it." Together, they lifted the weakened dog, carrying him out into the icy air. The snow stung Daniel's cheeks, but compared to the cabin's stale rot, it felt almost clean. Behind them, the raven's mark glared from the wall like a shadow refusing to fade. The morning after the storm, Ashwood Creek seemed almost unreal, a town smothered in silence beneath heavy snow. Smoke trailed thinly from chimneys. Shop signs creaked in the brittle wind, and children's footsteps from the day before had vanished under fresh drifts. Daniel Whitaker drove the police SUV slowly down Main Street, his hands tight on the wheel, though he hardly noticed. Ranger lay curled in the back seat, his ribs still visible beneath his black and silver coat, despite Emily's careful bandaging the night before. His amber eyes, dulled by exhaustion, flickered open whenever the SUV jostled, and each time they found Daniel, steady and searching, as if to anchor himself to the only familiar thing left in a world that had betrayed him. Daniel had not slept. He spent the night at his desk rereading the notes he once wrote to his wife, pages stained with coffee, and sometimes with the grief he could not bury. But now those pages had a different witness. Ranger, breathing shallowly, and that crimson mark on the wall of the cabin, the raven with outstretched wings that mocked him with its simplicity. At the veterinary clinic, Emily Hart was already waiting when he pulled up. She had changed from the fleece and jeans of the night before into a crisp white sweater, her auburn hair drawn into a low ponytail, face bare of makeup, but still carrying that quiet authority born of years treating animals in places where chaos reigned. She greeted him with a nod, her brown eyes calm but shadowed, and motioned him inside. Inside, warmth pressed against the cold. Shelves lined with bandages and glass jars stood beside a wood stove that ticked softly. Emily knelt beside Ranger, her hands steady as she peeled away damp gauze, the scent of antiseptic sharp in the air. "He's stronger than most would be after this," she murmured. "But these injuries? Someone kept him alive only enough to use him. His muscles show training, but not the kind you'd want a dog to have." Daniel stiffened. "Black Ravens." Emily looked up, her expression tightening. I've heard the name. When I worked with the National Guard, there were whispers about gangs moving animals across state lines. They treat them like property, disposable tools. She paused, her voice dipping lower. When I was a kid in foster care, I saw kids treated the same way, passed around, forgotten. It leaves scars. Her honesty startled him. She rarely spoke of herself, and now he saw how it shaped her. Her refusal to let cruelty go unanswered, her tireless care even when the world seemed indifferent. The door jingled open. Deputy Marcus Reed entered, stamping snow from his boots. His broad frame filled the doorway, his winter jacket dusted white. Marcus had a boyish face despite being 30, skin dark and warm-toned, his black hair cropped close. A former basketball player, whose college dreams ended with his father's illness, Marcus had joined the force, with energy to prove himself. Yet behind his easy grin was the pressure of debt and a family depending on him. "Morning, Chief," Marcus said, tugging off his gloves. His voice carried the weight of both respect and eagerness. "Got your message? You said you found something in that cabin?" Daniel handed him a folder of photographs he had taken. Marcus frowned at the red raven symbol. "I've seen this before. Graffiti on the South Side rail yard. I thought it was just punks tagging walls. Guess not." Emily straightened, folding bloodied bandages neatly. "It's their brand, like leaving a calling card." Ranger, as if to punctuate her words, lifted his head weakly and gave a single sharp bark. His gaze flicked toward the corner of the clinic, where Daniel had propped the door taken from the cabin. Old wood, its hinges corroded, with the same raven burned faintly into the grain. Marcus shifted uneasily. "So, what's the plan? You think they're back in town?" Daniel met his eyes. "I think they never left." The three of them spoke in low tones, forming an uneasy alliance. Marcus would canvass the town for sightings of trucks with metal cages. Emily promised to treat any dogs they might find, turning her small clinic into an improvised rescue center. Daniel, meanwhile, could not ignore the feeling that the locked back room in the cabin had been left for him to find, as if Ranger had tried to lead him there before the interruption. Later that afternoon, Daniel drove alone back to the cabin. Clouds gathered low, turning the forest into a dim cathedral of white and shadow. Ranger insisted on accompanying him, though his steps were stiff, his breath ragged. Daniel relented, lifting him gently into the SUV. They returned to the rotting porch, its wood groaning like a voice from the past. Inside, the smell was worse in daylight: mildew, blood, and rust. The symbol glared from the wall, and in its presence Daniel felt time fold back to that night 3 years ago. Ryan's laughter on the radio, the sudden burst of gunfire, the sickening silence that followed. He touched the wall as if to steady himself, his glove brushing over flaking paint. Ranger moved first. Though weak, he padded straight to the bolted door at the back, nails clicking against warped boards. His ears pricked, his body tense. He gave a low growl that rumbled in his chest. Daniel crouched, pressing his ear to the door. Behind it came the faintest sound, dripping water maybe, or the echo of something shifting below ground. He pulled out a small pry bar from his belt, testing the hinges, but the wood was reinforced, heavier than it looked. Whoever locked it had meant for it to stay shut. He swore under his breath, stepping back. Ranger barked once, sharp and insistent, then slumped down, exhausted by the effort. Daniel lifted him again, whispering, "Not today, old friend. We'll come back better prepared." As they left, he noticed fresh tracks in the snow, boot prints, half filled with new flakes, but recent enough to make his chest tighten. Someone else had been here, maybe even watching. By nightfall, he was back in town, weary but resolved. At Emily's clinic, the lights glowed warmly. Inside, he found her tending to a stray puppy a neighbor had brought in, a small beagle with a broken paw. She smiled faintly when she saw Daniel, her hands gentle as she wrapped the splint. "Not every case is as grim as yours," she said softly. Daniel, standing in the doorway with Ranger leaning against his leg, allowed himself a rare smile. In that small room, with the crackle of the stove and Emily's quiet dedication, he felt something stir that he had thought gone forever, a flicker of hope. But when he laid Ranger down to rest, his eyes caught on the raven-marked door leaning against the clinic wall. Its presence was like a shadow in the corner of the room, a reminder that Ashwood Creek was not safe, and that whatever secrets the Ravens kept, they were far from finished. Snow still blanketed Ashwood Creek in the early morning, drifts piled high against porches and fences, the streets so quiet that even the crows seemed reluctant to break the stillness. Daniel Whitaker stood in his small kitchen, the map he had retrieved from the cabin spread across his worn wooden table. Red ink marked routes and hidden symbols he did not fully understand. And at the center of it all sat the raven emblem, crude but menacing. Ranger lay on a blanket nearby, his chest rising and falling heavily. The German shepherd was still gaunt, his black and silver coat ragged, scars visible beneath thinning fur. Yet, when he caught Daniel's gaze, his amber eyes sharpened with an awareness that told Daniel the fight inside him was far from gone. Daniel's solitude was broken by a knock on the door. Marcus Reed stepped in, his broad frame filling the doorway, wearing a heavy gray parka and wool cap pulled low. He looked tired, a shadow under his eyes, but his grin flickered when he saw Ranger stir. "Dog looks better than yesterday," he said. "You must be doing something right." Daniel gestured to the map. "Or maybe he's trying to tell us something." Marcus leaned over the table, studying the scrawled markings. "These lines, looks like delivery routes. See how they loop out near the quarry road? That's where I used to practice ball with my buddies. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too unstable." His tone grew heavier. "If they're using it, it means they think no one will follow." As they spoke, Emily arrived, cheeks flushed from the cold, carrying a basket with supplies, bandages, a few syringes, and even bread she had baked herself. She looked smaller in the bulk of her navy winter coat, her auburn hair tucked beneath a knitted hat. Setting the basket down, she crouched to check Ranger, murmuring gentle reassurances. Her voice softened, but her eyes glinted with quiet determination. "He's healing, but slowly. Trauma like his, it doesn't just fade. You have to rebuild trust, step by step." She glanced at Daniel knowingly, as if speaking about more than the dog. Emily's presence shifted the atmosphere in the room. Where Daniel carried weight like armor, she brought a steadiness born of surviving her own storms. She had grown up moving between foster homes, often treated as an afterthought, but instead of becoming bitter, she forged herself into someone unwilling to abandon the weak. Daniel recognized that same spirit in Ranger, battered yet still loyal. The trio pored over the map, debating their next step. Marcus insisted on scouting the rail yard, where he had once seen the Raven graffiti. Emily, though not a law officer, refused to be left behind, arguing that if dogs were involved, her skills would be essential. Daniel hesitated but relented, knowing she would not forgive being shut out. By late afternoon, they drove together to the edge of town. The rail yard sprawled beneath a slate-gray sky, its rusting tracks half buried in snow. Abandoned freight cars lined the edges, their paint peeled and windows broken. Ranger perked up the moment the SUV slowed, his ears twitching, nose pressed against the cold glass. His body stiffened with recognition. They left the vehicle and began walking through the yard. Daniel's boots crunched over gravel, his hand never straying far from the holstered pistol at his side. Marcus scanned the area with sharp eyes, moving with the restless energy of a man who hated stillness. Emily followed close, clutching her coat tighter around herself, though her gaze roved with careful focus. Near one of the boxcars, Ranger froze, his hackles rising. He gave a low growl that reverberated through the cold air. Daniel motioned for silence, then stepped forward. The boxcar's door was ajar, a dark void against the white snow. From inside came the faint clink of metal. Daniel raised a hand, and Marcus pulled out his flashlight. They swung the beam inside. The light revealed a chain hanging from the ceiling, and, beneath it, a small cage smeared with rust and dried blood. It was empty, but scraps of fur clung to the bars. Emily knelt, brushing a gloved hand along the cage. Her jaw tightened. "This was recent," she whispered. "They moved dogs through here, maybe even Ranger." Suddenly, a sound echoed from the far side of the yard, boots crunching. Daniel tensed, drawing his pistol, Marcus at his side with his flashlight ready. From between the cars emerged a man in his early 50s, hunched, with a long gray beard and weathered face. His coat was torn, patched with duct tape, and his eyes darted nervously. "Don't shoot!" he cried, raising his hands. His voice was hoarse, ragged with years of cold nights and too many bottles. Daniel lowered his weapon slightly but kept it ready. "Who are you?" The man swallowed hard. "Name's Walter Price. I live around here in the old freight office. Been here since the mills closed. Ain't got anywhere else." Emily stepped forward, her tone careful. "Walter, did you see anything? Anyone with dogs?" Walter scratched at his beard, eyes flicking between them. "Saw a truck couple nights back, big one, with cages in the back. They loaded it up quick. Had that raven mark sprayed on the side. I keep my head down, don't want no trouble, but..." He glanced at Ranger, who stared at him with unblinking intensity. "That one, I seen him before. They brought him here. He fought 'em, even chained. Never seen a dog so stubborn." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He crouched slightly, softening his tone. "Walter, we need to know where they went. Anything you remember." Walter hesitated, shifting on his feet. "Quarry Road. Same direction as your map, I reckon. But listen, they ain't alone. They got guns, lots of 'em. And they don't care who gets hurt." Marcus exhaled sharply, muttering under his breath. Emily's hand brushed Ranger's fur, steadying him as if steadying herself. Daniel straightened, his mind already racing. The ravens were closer than he had feared, and now they had proof. As the group left the yard, Walter shuffled back into the shadows, his figure disappearing among rusting cars. Emily watched him go with a troubled expression. "People slip through cracks," she murmured. "Not just dogs." On the drive back, the storm began again, snow swirling like ash in the headlights. Ranger lay against Daniel's side, eyelids heavy, but his body tense whenever the road curved toward the forest. Daniel reached down, resting a hand on the dog's back. For 3 years, he had convinced himself Ranger was gone. Now, with the ravens moving in their town, he realized Ranger's return was not chance. It was a warning. The past had not finished with him. The ghosts of that night 3 years ago were stirring, and this time they were not content to remain in memory. The storm had eased by the next morning, leaving Ashwood Creek cloaked in a deceptive calm. Icicles clung to eaves like jagged teeth. The frozen river glinted beneath the pale sun, and the air had that brittle stillness that always came before something broke. Daniel Whitaker stood by his SUV, tugging on his gloves, the map folded in his coat pocket. He had not stopped thinking about Walter Price's words. Quarry Road, cages, guns. Every line led him back to the same truth. Black ravens had never abandoned this town. Marcus Reed pulled up in his own pickup, the truck old but reliable, paint chipped from years of mountain winters. He stepped out in a thick brown jacket, his face serious despite his usual energy. His debt weighed heavy, but he hadn't told Daniel the full story. His younger sister Maya, a college sophomore, had just been forced to pause her education to work nights at a diner, helping their parents pay medical bills for their father's failing kidneys. Marcus carried that shame quietly, believing promotion was the only way to set things right. Emily arrived last, her small SUV crunching to a halt. She wore a padded navy coat, scarf wound tight, her auburn hair escaping her hat in strands. She carried a satchel packed with supplies, bandages, antibiotics, even extra blankets for dogs. She refused to come unprepared. Ranger rode in Daniel's SUV, weaker but insistent on joining. His body was thin, but his amber eyes glowed with the stubborn fire of survival. The drive to the quarry road was long, cutting through pine forests heavy with snow. The sun dipped lower, staining the world in muted gold. When they reached the end of the paved road, the tracks began. Deep ruts pressed into ice, tire marks wide enough for heavy trucks. Daniel slowed, headlights slicing through skeletal trees. Ranger pressed against the window, ears alert, body trembling, not with weakness, but recognition. They followed the tracks until the forest opened into a clearing. Ahead, half hidden under sagging tin and leaning boards, stood a warehouse. It was once used for stone storage decades ago, long abandoned. Now, smoke curled faintly from a side vent. Daniel parked at a distance. The three moved on foot, snow crunching under boots. Ranger padded close, each breath fogging the air. They crouched near a rusted fence, surveying the warehouse. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Fresh footprints led to the side door. He motioned Marcus forward, The deputy crouched, flashlight low, his tall frame surprisingly graceful. Emily followed, quieter than either, though her breath came faster in the cold. Inside, the air was thick with rust, oil, and the sharp stench of animals. The beam of Daniel's flashlight cut across rows of chain-link kennels. Dogs stared back, German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, even a scarred Labrador, their fur matted, eyes wide with terror. Chains clinked when they shifted. Some barked hoarsely, others lay still, too weak to move. Emily gasped softly, her hands clenching. "My God," she whispered, already moving toward the cages. She dropped to her knees beside a young shepherd, barely 2 years old, its black coat dulled, ribs visible beneath its skin. It whimpered at her touch, but pressed its nose into her palm, desperate for kindness. "We can't leave them," she said firmly, her voice trembling with outrage. Marcus scanned the shadows. "We won't. But if ravens are here, we don't have long." A sound came from the far end, metal scraping. They froze. Daniel raised his pistol, motioning them back. From the shadows emerged a man in his late 30s, tall and wiry, with a gaunt face and hollow cheeks. His black coat hung loose, his eyes sunken yet alert. A crude raven tattoo spread across his neck. His name was Jonah Pike, one of the Raven's middlemen, known in the county for petty crimes before vanishing years ago. His look was jittery, like a man who lived too long on adrenaline and cheap whiskey. Jonah spotted them, his lips curling into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Well, well, Silver Creek's finest, you're trespassing." His voice was raspy, mocking. Daniel stepped forward. "These dogs aren't yours. Release them, Jonah." Jonah laughed, a dry sound. "They ain't yours either. Ravens own everything here. You should have stayed away, Whitaker." Ranger growled, the sound low and dangerous. His body tensed, teeth bared, though weakness still gnawed at his muscles. Jonah's gaze flicked toward the dog, and for a moment unease cracked his smirk. "That one? I remember him? Didn't think he'd survive." Emily's voice cut sharp. "He survived because he's stronger than you'll ever be." Jonah's smirk faltered. He glanced toward the side door, where footsteps echoed. Others were coming. "Guess you'll see how strong when my friends arrive." Daniel moved fast. He raised his pistol and fired a warning shot into the rafters. The crack echoed like thunder. Dogs barked wildly, chains rattling. Jonah cursed and bolted, slipping through the shadows toward the far exit. Daniel didn't chase. He knew it was a trap. Instead, he turned to Marcus. "Free them, now!" Marcus and Emily rushed to the kennels, fumbling with heavy latches. Dogs poured out, some limping, others bounding with desperate relief. Emily spoke softly, guiding them with calm words. One shepherd leaned heavily against her, too weak to stand alone. Marcus lifted a Belgian Malinois in his arms, the dog's body trembling but alive. Ranger barked sharply, pulling Daniel's attention. The German shepherd stood at the edge of a boarded section of the floor, his paws scraping frantically. Daniel crouched, running a hand along the planks. A faint draft brushed his fingers. Without hesitation, he pried a board loose. Beneath lay a trap door, a narrow stair descending into darkness. From below came the muffled sound of whimpering. Emily's face paled. "There are more." Daniel's jaw clenched. "We're not leaving anyone behind." The trapdoor opened fully, revealing a cramped cellar lit by a single bulb. Inside were 3 more cages, smaller, packed with puppies. Their tiny bodies shook in the cold, their eyes wide. Emily dropped to her knees, reaching for them, tears stinging her eyes. "Who does this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Jonah's voice echoed from outside the warehouse. "The kind of men who don't lose. You're too late." His words carried the scrape of an engine revving. Headlights slashed across the snow as trucks pulled into the clearing. Daniel slammed the trapdoor shut, barking orders. "Marcus, get them out the back. Emily, take the weak ones first. Ranger, with me." The warehouse erupted in chaos, dogs barking, chains rattling, engines roaring outside. Daniel positioned himself at the front, pistol raised, Ranger at his side, a ghost of the past reborn to fight once more. Engines roared outside the warehouse. their guttural growls echoing across the frozen clearing like beasts circling prey. Daniel Whitaker's heart hammered as headlights cut through cracks in the rotting walls, illuminating dust and chains. Ranger stood tense beside him, fur bristling, teeth bared in a silent snarl. The German shepherd's body still bore the marks of captivity, but in that moment he seemed to shed weakness, every muscle primed as though he knew this was the fight that mattered. Daniel glanced back. Marcus Reed was already ushering dogs through a rear exit, his broad frame bending awkwardly under the weight of a Malinois too weak to walk. Emily Hart knelt by the trap door, lifting trembling puppies into a wool blanket she had stripped from her own satchel. Her face was flushed, auburn hair sticking to her temples, but her hands were steady as she whispered to the frightened animals. The sight hardened Daniel's resolve. None of them could fall into Raven hands. The warehouse door crashed open. Jonah Pike strode in first, flanked by two men. Jonah's wiry frame seemed almost skeletal under his black coat, but his eyes glittered with triumph. The man to his left was bulkier, mid-40s, with a crooked nose and thick beard, his leather jacket creaking when he moved. The other was younger, no older than 20, pale and thin, wearing a knit cap pulled low. Both carried shotguns slung carelessly, their posture betraying men used to intimidation rather than trained combat. Jonah sneered. "You should have run when you had the chance, Whitaker. Ravens don't forgive." Daniel raised his pistol, voice even. Neither do men who've buried their partners. For a heartbeat, silence ruled. Then chaos erupted. The younger thug swung his shotgun upward, but Ranger lunged before the barrel leveled, his jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The youth shrieked, dropping the weapon as teeth tore through his sleeve. Daniel fired at the ceiling again, a warning shot that sent wooden splinters raining down, distracting the bearded man long enough for Marcus to charge back in, fist connecting with his jaw. Emily pressed flat against the kennels, shielding the puppies. She wasn't a fighter, but her courage lay in refusing to flee. The scarred Labrador she had freed earlier growled low at her side, its body crouched in defense as though the dog already understood she had become its protector. Jonah ducked behind a support beam, gun drawn. "Kill the mutt first," he shouted. Daniel's blood turned to fire. "You'll try." The fight sprawled through the warehouse like a storm. The bearded man swung wildly with his shotgun stock, catching Marcus across the shoulder. Marcus staggered but roared back, his years of basketball training lending speed to his footwork. He grabbed a rusted pipe from the floor and parried another strike, his breath steaming in the cold. Rage burned in his eyes, not just for himself, but for his family, for all the debts that chained him. He fought with the desperation of a man who could not afford to lose. Ranger released the younger thug, who scrambled away clutching his torn arm. The shepherd limped, but snarled again, eyes burning like coals. His scars seemed to glow in the dim light, each mark a testament to battles survived. He darted toward Jonah, forcing the gang leader back. Emily cried out suddenly. One of the puppies slipped from the blanket, tumbling across the floor. Jonah's gaze flicked toward it, and for a sickening moment, his smile widened. Daniel's shot rang out, the bullet striking inches from Jonah's boots. "Don't!" Daniel barked, voice breaking with fury. Jonah cursed and ducked through a side exit, disappearing into the dark. The bearded man, seeing his leader flee, wavered just long enough for Marcus to slam him against the kennel wall. The thug crumpled, unconscious. The younger one limped out behind Jonah, leaving blood drops across the snow. Silence fell, broken only by panting dogs and the creak of the warehouse settling. Daniel's chest heaved, his pistol lowering. Marcus leaned heavily against the wall, sweat freezing on his brow despite the cold. Emily gathered the puppies back, rocking them gently, murmuring soft words. "Is everyone alive?" Daniel asked, scanning them. Emily nodded, though tears streaked her cheeks. "For now, but they'll be back." Ranger limped to Daniel's side, pressing against his leg. His amber eyes met Daniel's with an intensity that needed no words. He had fought not as a weakened survivor, but as the partner Daniel had lost 3 years ago. They worked quickly. Marcus bound the bearded man's wrists with rope scavenged from the kennels. Emily coaxed the freed dogs into following her outside, their whines piercing the frigid air. The puppies nestled in her coat, tiny bodies radiating fragile warmth. Outside, the clearing was eerily quiet. The trucks Jonah had brought were gone, only tire tracks cutting deep grooves into the snow. Smoke from their engines lingered in the night air. Daniel scanned the darkness, jaw tight. Jonah had escaped again, but not unscathed. His network was cracked, his dogs reclaimed. They loaded the rescued animals into Marcus's pickup, Ranger riding in the front seat beside Daniel, his head resting against the officer's shoulder. Emily sat in back, cradling the puppies, her eyes distant. Marcus climbed behind the wheel of his truck, grimacing at his bruised shoulder, but refusing help. As they drove back toward town, Emily spoke softly. "Daniel, we need more than rescues. These ravens won't stop until they're destroyed." Daniel didn't answer at first, the headlights carving tunnels through the snow. His mind replayed Jonah's voice, the cruel smirk, the raven burned into wood. Finally, he said, "Then we won't stop either, not until every chain is broken." The words hung heavy in the cab, but in the silence that followed, Ranger shifted, pressing closer to Daniel. For the first time since that night 3 years ago, Daniel felt the flicker of something he thought lost, purpose bound not by grief, but by duty renewed. Morning broke pale over Ashwood Creek, sunlight weak and scattered through thin layers of frost. The town seemed hushed, as if sensing the violence that had erupted on the outskirts the night before. Daniel Whitaker drove into town with Ranger beside him, the German shepherd resting heavily against the seat. The dog's body was still too lean, scars raw along his flank, but his eyes burned with alertness, scanning the passing storefronts. Daniel's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. Jonah Pike had slipped away, and with him, the trail to the Raven's core. The first stop was the sheriff's office. Sheriff Leonard Holloway was waiting, a tall man in his late 50s, shoulders stooped, but voice gravelly with the authority of decades in uniform. His hair was silver, his weathered face lined like cracked earth. He had the look of someone who had seen more betrayals than victories, and his patience for mistakes was thin. "You brought me 1 prisoner and 20 strays," he said, as Daniel, Marcus, and Emily filed in. "But Jonah Pike, the one that mattered, is gone." Daniel bristled. "We saved lives. Those dogs aren't strays, they're evidence." Emily, standing slightly behind, tightened her scarf. Her face was pale, but her eyes sharp. "They're more than evidence, Sheriff. They're victims, and I'll care for them, whether this department values them or not." Holloway's gaze softened briefly at her defiance. He knew her reputation, a vet who never turned away an injured creature, no matter who brought it in or whether they could pay. He rubbed his temple and sighed. "Fine, keep them at your clinic, but you'll need help. Folks will talk." Talk they did. By noon, townspeople gathered outside Emily's small clinic, drawn by word of the rescue. Farmers, store clerks, mothers with children. They came with blankets, food, and curiosity. Emily moved among them with surprising command, her auburn hair tucked beneath a wool cap, her sleeves rolled to her elbows as she guided volunteers. She directed an elderly couple to set up kennels in the back, thanked a teenage boy who carried bags of kibble, and gently corrected a curious child who reached too close to a frightened shepherd. She was no longer just the quiet vet on the edge of town. She was becoming something else, the voice for those who could not speak. Inside, Marcus worked alongside her, wrapping bandages and cleaning wounds. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt despite the winter air. When a farmer asked if he'd ever considered running for sheriff one day, Marcus laughed it off, but the thought lingered. He carried his family's debts like invisible chains, but here, with grateful neighbors and wagging tails around him, he felt, for once, that he was part of something larger than his failures. While the clinic thrummed with activity, Daniel returned to the warehouse site with 2 deputies. The snow bore fresh tracks. Boot. Prints mingled with tire marks. Near the tree line, he discovered a charred fire pit, ashes still warm. Sifting through them, his gloved hand struck metal, a burned notebook clasp, warped and blackened. He tucked it away, jaw tightening. The ravens had destroyed what they could, but perhaps not all. That evening, the 3 met at Daniel's modest home. Ranger sprawled on the rug near the fire, his head heavy but ears twitching at every sound. Daniel laid out the clasp and other scraps, shards of paper with smudged writing, a torn map corner. Emily leaned closer, her fingers brushing the edge of one fragment. This symbol, see? Not just the raven. These lines, they're coordinates. Marcus frowned, resting a bruised shoulder. Coordinates to what? Daniel's eyes narrowed. Underground routes, the quarry, maybe more. They've been hiding in plain sight. Before they could discuss further, a knock sounded. Daniel rose cautiously, pistol at his side. At the door stood a woman wrapped in a long black coat, her figure slender, face half-shadowed beneath a hood. She introduced herself as Claire Donovan, early 40s, tall and elegant, but worn thin. Her blonde hair fell in straight locks, streaked with gray, and her blue eyes carried a cold sharpness that spoke of hard years. She explained she had once worked as an informant for state police, tracking illegal smuggling rings. When she heard whispers the ravens were resurfacing, she came to warn them. Claire's past clung to her like smoke. She had grown up the daughter of a logger, her father killed in an accident that later was revealed to be linked to the same gang. That truth had shaped her, made her calculating, unwilling to trust easily, her kindness buried under layers of armor. She spoke plainly, her voice precise. Jonah Pike isn't the leader. He's a pawn. The ravens answer to someone else. If you want to crush them, you'll need to follow the shipments. They're not just moving dogs. They're moving weapons. The revelation chilled the room. Marcus swore softly under his breath. Emily hugged her arms tight, staring at the fire. Daniel leaned back, the weight of it settling into his bones. Weapons and animals, smuggling both through Ashwood Creek. Claire nodded. And they'll come back for what they lost. The fire popped in the hearth, Ranger lifting his head at the sound, his amber eyes catching the light like embers. Daniel reached down, hand brushing the dog's scarred neck. He had thought the fight was about one missing K9. Now he knew it was about the entire town's survival. The sky above Ashwood Creek was the color of tarnished steel, clouds sagging low over the mountains. By late afternoon, the snow had hardened to ice, crunching beneath boots and tires like brittle glass. Daniel Whitaker stood at the edge of the old timber bridge on Miller's Crossing, named long ago for the mill families who once carted lumber across its wooden planks. Now it was weathered, its beams warped and railings splintered, spanning a narrow gorge where a frozen creek shimmered beneath layers of snow. Daniel had chosen this place for a reason. It was secluded, only one way in and one way out. If the ravens came through here, there would be no escape. Marcus Reed tightened the strap of his tactical vest, shifting uncomfortably. His broad shoulders made the vest look almost too small, his bruised arm from the warehouse fight hidden beneath layers of padding. Sweat glistened on his temple despite the cold. He cracked his knuckles, restless energy sparking through him. "Feels like we're the ones walking into an ambush," he muttered. Daniel adjusted the rifle slung across his chest, his jaw set. "Not this time. We know their routes now. We make the ground ours." His voice carried a steel Marcus had not heard since the warehouse raid. Emily Hart arrived minutes later, her breath visible in clouds. She wasn't dressed for battle, but for resilience. A thick parka, fur-lined boots, medical satchel across her shoulder. Her auburn hair was braided tight under her hat, her cheeks flushed pink. Her eyes, however, carried no hesitation. "You'll need someone to handle the wounded," she said simply, brushing past Marcus's attempt to stop her. "And don't bother telling me to stay behind. I'm here." Ranger stood at Daniel's side, posture stiff but alert. Though his ribs still showed and his gait was uneven, his amber eyes tracked every sound, ears flicking at the whisper of wind across the trees. The scars along his muzzle glowed faintly in the pale light, but he was no longer the broken creature from the cabin. In the sharp air of Miller's Crossing, he looked like a soldier reclaimed. They weren't alone. Sheriff Leonard Holloway had reluctantly agreed to lend them one more deputy, Claire Donovan's contact, a man named Frank Ortega. Frank was in his mid-40s, stocky, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He wore an old army jacket beneath his vest, the patches long removed, but the discipline still evident in his straight posture. Frank had served 10 years in the Marines before leaving under circumstances he never discussed, but the precision in his movements told enough. His dark eyes were steady, his voice low and measured. "If they're moving weapons, they'll come with numbers. Expect more than 3 or 4. expect desperation. Claire Donovan herself was present too, standing a few paces away, her tall, slender frame wrapped in a long coat. Her blonde hair, streaked with gray, was tied back sharply, her cold blue eyes scanning the bridge and tree line with a predator's patience. She carried no badge, only a small pistol at her hip, and the confidence of someone who had walked into dangerous places and walked back out. She spoke little, but when she did, the others listened. As dusk fell, headlights glowed faintly in the distance. The low hum of engines grew louder, reverberating through the frozen gorge. Ranger stiffened, ears forward, growl low in his throat. Daniel raised a hand. Positions. They crouched behind the bridge's broken rails, weapons ready. Emily stayed back, hidden behind an overturned sled of lumber, her satchel open and bandages ready. Ranger pressed against Daniel's leg, muscles quivering with anticipation. The first truck appeared, lumbering onto the bridge. Its sides bore faint graffiti, raven's wings and red spray paint, half covered by snow. Behind it followed a second vehicle, smaller, with metal grills bolted over its windows. From the open slats came muffled barks. Dogs. Daniel's pulse surged. He raised his rifle, fired a warning shot into the air. The crack split the silence like thunder. The truck screeched to a halt, tires spinning against ice. Doors flew open, men spilled out, half a dozen in dark coats, weapons glinting in the fading light. At their center, Jonah Pike emerged, his gaunt face twisted into a snarl. His voice carried across the gorge. "Whitaker, always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" Daniel's reply was steady. "This ends here, Jonah." The firefight erupted. Bullets whined through the air, splintering wood, sparks leaping from metal. Marcus fired from cover, his broad frame braced against the bridge's railing. Frank moved with clinical precision, shots measured and calm, forcing the ravens to scatter. Claire advanced with surprising speed, her small pistol cracking sharp reports that cut through the chaos. Ranger bolted forward, ignoring Daniel's call, charging straight for Jonah. The shepherd's growl rolled like thunder, his scarred muzzle bared in fury. Jonah cursed, firing wildly, but the dog moved like a shadow, teeth snapping at his arm. Jonah fell back, pistol clattering across the ice. Marcus grunted, taking a glancing blow to his vest. He staggered, breath ragged, but pushed forward, slamming one thug to the ground with the force of a linebacker. His debt, his family's burden, all of it seemed to ignite into pure determination. Meanwhile, Emily heard a cry from the smaller truck. She darted across the bridge under fire, her boots slipping on ice. Inside the cage back, she found 3 shepherds crammed together, their eyes wide with terror. She ripped at the lock with shaking hands, finally prying it free. The dog spilled into her arms, one licking her face as if recognizing her as savior. Daniel charged Jonah, fists slamming into his chest. Jonah fought like a cornered animal, snarling, his gaunt body fueled by rage. But Ranger was there too, pressing the advantage, forcing Jonah to stumble. Daniel finally knocked him flat, his pistol pressed against Jonah's temple. The rest of the ravens broke. Shots rang wild as they scrambled into the woods, abandoning their trucks. Frank held fire, conserving bullets, while Marcus leaned heavily against the railing, catching his breath. Emily emerged, shepherds at her side, her cheeks streaked with tears and snow. Jonah spat blood, glaring up at Daniel. "You think this ends me? Ravens don't die, they multiply." Daniel's voice was ice. "Then we'll be here every time." He bound Jonah's wrists with rope, hauling him upright. Ranger stood at his side, muzzle scarred, eyes blazing. When it was over, the bridge lay shattered, planks riddled with bullet holes, smoke rising faintly from the trucks. The rescued dogs huddled against Emily, tails wagging weakly. Marcus limped to her side, offering a tired grin. Claire stood with arms crossed, her cold gaze following the trail of ravens into the forest. Frank simply nodded once, the soldier in him satisfied. Daniel looked out across the frozen gorge, Jonah bound at his feet, Ranger pressed against his leg. The night was not won, but for the first time since Ryan's death, Daniel felt that the tide had shifted. The ambush had been reversed. The cell in the sheriff's office smelled faintly of mildew and cold iron, its walls lined with peeling paint. Jonah Pike sat shackled to a chair, his gaunt face bruised from the fight at Miller's Crossing. His eyes, pale and feverish, darted constantly, like a caged animal searching for cracks in the bars. Daniel Whitaker stood just outside the bars, Ranger lying at his feet. The German shepherd's ears twitched, and every time Jonah shifted, Ranger's lips peeled back in a low growl. Sheriff Leonard Holloway leaned against the desk in the corner, arms folded, his silver hair catching the light of the single overhead lamp. "He's not talking," Holloway muttered. "Men like him would rather choke on their own tongues than sell out the nest." Claire Donovan stepped forward, her tall frame imposing despite her slender build. She fixed Jonah with cold blue eyes. "He's not loyal. He's terrified. The difference is important." Her voice was precise, measured. She crouched to Jonah's level. "You know what happens to ravens who fail, don't you? They don't keep you alive out of mercy. They keep you alive to make an example." Jonah's jaw tightened, but a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Daniel caught it. "Tell us who runs this operation," Daniel said, his voice quieter than Holloway's, but sharper. "Who gave the order to ambush Ryan Miller 3 years ago?" At the name, Ranger let out a sharp bark, the sound like a whip crack. Jonah flinched, eyes flicking involuntarily toward Daniel, then away. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "You think it was me? I'm nothing but a runner. The man you want, he doesn't show his face. Calls himself Crow. Nobody knows if it's his real name. He's the one with the connections. Dogs, guns, everything." Jonah licked his cracked lips. "And Ryan, your partner, he died because Crow said he knew too much. Ravens don't forgive, they don't forget." Daniel's fists clenched, his breath ragged. Holloway's voice broke the silence. "Where is Crow?" Jonah let out a rasping laugh. "That's the thing. You don't find him. He finds you. And when he does, it's already too late." Claire's eyes narrowed, reading him. She stood abruptly, leaving Jonah trembling in his chair. "He's telling the truth about Crow," she said. "I've heard the name before. He's not just a smuggler. He's building something bigger, networks across counties, maybe even states. Jonah's just a pawn." Holloway swore under his breath. "Then we've only lit a match in a powder keg." While the cell held its shadows, another part of Ashwood Creek pulsed with life. Emily Hart's clinic, once quiet, now buzzed with people. The story of the rescued dogs had spread across the town and beyond, drawing volunteers and donations. That afternoon, she hosted a small fundraiser in the community hall, a wide wooden building with strings of lights hanging across the beams. The air smelled of cinnamon cider and wood smoke, the crowd warmed by shared purpose. Emily stood at the front, auburn hair pulled back neatly, her simple sweater dusted with dog fur. Though she was not a natural speaker, her voice carried sincerity that quieted the room. "These animals are more than victims," she said, one hand resting on the head of a young shepherd that leaned trustingly against her. "They are survivors, and they remind us that loyalty and courage endure, even when cruelty tries to break them. With your help, we can give them more than survival. We can give them a home." The crowd responded warmly, clapping and murmuring. A young woman stepped forward to donate. Her name was Sarah Calloway, a schoolteacher in her early 30s, tall and slender with dark curls tied back. Her face was pale but kind, her smile shy but genuine. She had lost her husband 2 years earlier in a logging accident, raising her 8-year-old son alone. That grief had left her quieter, but also more empathetic, her gaze always softening when it fell on the abandoned or the lost. She bent down to stroke the rescued Labrador, her son at her side giggling when the dog licked his mittened hands. Emily caught her eye, and in that moment, she saw an ally she hadn't expected. Marcus moved through the crowd, his usual easy grin returning as he helped serve cider and set up kennels outside the hall. For once, the weight of debt didn't press so heavily. Neighbors clapped his back, thanking him, calling him brave. He felt pride bloom, a rare warmth that made him believe he might someday be more than the boy who gave up basketball, more than the man chained by bills. Meanwhile, Daniel arrived late, his uniform still dusted with frost, the weight of Jonah's words pressing against his shoulders. He paused at the door, watching Emily speak, the light catching her hair, her presence filling the room. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe without the constant weight of loss. But as applause filled the hall, his eyes drifted toward Ranger lying near the stage, scars visible under his thickening coat. The shepherd's gaze was fixed on the door, ears pricked, body tense. Daniel followed his dog's line of sight, heart tightening. For just a flicker of a second, a shadow shifted outside the window, a figure watching before melting into the night. The celebration continued, laughter echoing beneath the beams, but Daniel knew the truth. The ravens had not been broken. Crow was still out there, watching, waiting, and the fire they had lit in Ashwood Creek had cast long shadows. Snow fell gently the morning of the ceremony, soft flakes drifting like feathers across the rooftops of Ashwood Creek. The town square had been cleared, lanterns strung from lampposts, and folding chairs lined in neat rows before a wooden stage. For once, the town did not feel like a place carrying secrets. It felt alive, unified, as if the people themselves had risen to fight the shadows that once lingered in their woods. Daniel Whitaker stood off stage, his uniform pressed sharp, badge polished to a mirror shine. He wore no expression of pride, only quiet focus, though his hazel eyes softened when they fell upon Ranger. The German shepherd sat at his side, chest broader now, after weeks of recovery, his black and silver coat gleaming in the winter light. Scars still marked his muzzle and flank, but instead of diminishing him, they made him regal, a living emblem of endurance. Beside Daniel, Marcus Reed adjusted his tie awkwardly. He wore a clean gray suit borrowed from his cousin, the jacket slightly too tight around his broad shoulders. His usual grin faltered under nerves, but when neighbors waved at him from the crowd, he relaxed, waving back with shy warmth. He spotted his younger sister Maya in the front row. She had dark braids and wide, hopeful eyes, dressed in her diner uniform because she had come straight from a shift. Marcus's chest swelled with pride and relief. Thanks to the fundraiser, their father's medical treatments were secure. Emily Hart approached, dressed in a dark blue wool dress beneath a long coat, her auburn hair braided neatly. She had spent the last week transforming her veterinary clinic into an official rescue center, and the town now called it Haven Creek Rescue. Children lined up outside her door daily just to see the dogs. Today she looked tired but radiant, her brown eyes bright with quiet victory. The mayor, Linda Carver, a petite woman in her early 50s with short silver hair and a warm smile, stepped up to the podium. Her coat was the color of the winter sky, her voice steady, but filled with pride. Today we honor those who stood between Ashwood Creek and the darkness that sought to claim it. We honor courage, loyalty, and the reminder that even in our smallest town, we are not invisible to evil, but we are not powerless against it. Applause rippled through the crowd. Emily smiled faintly, Marcus nodded, and Daniel lowered his gaze, humbled. Ranger barked once, tail wagging as if to remind everyone why they were there. Behind the applause, however, Daniel's eyes scanned the edges of the square. He hadn't forgotten the shadow outside the fundraiser, the sign that Crow was watching. Claire Donovan had assured them that the FBI had followed Jonah Pike's leads. That morning, agents had raided a farmhouse 30 miles south, seizing weapons and arresting 3 men. Yet, Crow himself had slipped away, a ghost with no face. Daniel expected danger even here. He did not have to wait long. As the mayor pinned a new badge to Marcus's chest, marking him officially as sergeant, Ranger stiffened, his ears twitched, nose lifting, body tense. Daniel followed his gaze, toward a man weaving through the edge of the crowd. The stranger wore a heavy black coat, fur collar framing his sharp features. He was in his late 40s, tall, lean but powerful, with dark hair streaked with silver and a hawk-like nose. His eyes, pale gray, cut through the square like a blade. He moved with ease, shoulders relaxed, but there was a predatory weight in his stride. Daniel's breath caught. Crow? The man paused, hands tucked into his coat, watching from a distance. He did not flinch when Ranger barked, did not move when Daniel's hand went to his holster. Instead, Crow smiled faintly as if acknowledging a rival across a battlefield. Then he turned and walked calmly away, disappearing into the alley beyond the square. Daniel surged forward, but Ranger pressed against his leg, a low growl rumbling. Claire Donovan appeared at his side, eyes flashing. Not now, she whispered. He wants you to chase him. Today is not his victory. Daniel hesitated, torn between duty and wisdom. Finally, he exhaled, lowering his hand. The ceremony continued, the townspeople unaware of how close danger had brushed them. Afterward, people crowded around Emily's rescue dogs, children laughing, parents smiling. Marcus's sister hugged him tightly, and he ruffled her hair, embarrassed by his tears. Emily spoke with Sarah Calloway, the schoolteacher, who stood tall and graceful in a simple gray coat, her dark curls framing a face both kind and resilient. Sarah's son tugged at her hand, giggling as a shepherd pup licked his mitten. Emily leaned closer to Sarah, her voice warm, and a quiet friendship began to take root. Two women who understood loss but chose hope. Later that evening, Daniel walked Ranger through the quiet streets. Snow glowed under lantern light. The town hushed again. Ranger trotted close, his gait steady, his scars no longer marks of suffering, but of survival. Daniel spoke softly, as if to his lost friend Ryan, words carried into the night. We made it. He's still out there, but so are we. And we're ready this time. Ranger barked once, sharp and sure, as if to promise that the fight was not over, but the tide had changed. In Ashwood Creek, a new dawn had come, not the end of their battles, but the beginning of something stronger. A community united, a rescue reborn, and the bond between a man and his dog forged not just in grief, but in the fire of survival. In the end, what we witnessed in Ashwood Creek was more than courage or survival. It was a reminder that God's miracles often come quietly, through loyalty, love, and second chances. Just as Ranger returned when hope seemed lost, God sends us signs in our daily lives, sometimes in a friend's kindness, sometimes in a stranger's help, sometimes in the faithful eyes of a loyal companion. Let this story encourage you to look for those miracles each day. If you believe in the power of faith and second chances, type Amen in the comments. Share this story to inspire someone you love. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and remember to subscribe for more stories of hope and redemption. May God bless you and your family today and always.